It really was like an answer to a prayer for me, because after living through those 38 minutes where it felt like at any moment I could be hit by a nuclear missile, and then hearing that it was a false alarm, my first reaction after learning that was, my God, I'm still here. We're all still here. It was a sense that my life had been returned to me, that this was a wake-up call, and that it was also a gift. It was a gift because we had another chance to get this right, to do something about it.
That's the voice of Cynthia Lazaroff, the founder and director of Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy. She is one of today's guests on Press the Button, a Plasters Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security. And now here are your co-hosts, Tom Collina and Lauren Billett.
Thanks, Angela, and welcome back to Press the Button. Hi, Tom. Great to see you. How was your weekend?
Hey, Lauren. Great to see you. I had a good weekend. It was pretty quiet. I actually had the time to complete a home repair project where I had some water damage on wood on the side of my house. And I got out a ladder and I went up and I pulled it down and I fixed it and caulked it and painted it. So it was a very satisfying home improvement project, although it took way too long. How was your weekend?
Well, I'm glad that you survived climbing up and down that ladder. Heights scare me, so that's not something I would want to jump to do. Mine was much safer. I just sat on the couch and I knit a hat since it was raining and it was turning into fall. So, Tom, what do you have for us this week on nuclear news?
Well, just to mention briefly that over the weekend we marked the 21st anniversary of the September 11 terrorist attacks. You know, the anniversary seems to be declining in media attention, in part because, of course, it's been 21 years. U.S. troops are now out of Afghanistan, and the story was largely overshadowed by the death of Queen Elizabeth, but just wanted to mark it here on the show. Shifting to Iran, there is no good news to report, as talks on the nuclear deal remain stalled, and it appears that any new activity may be delayed until after the November elections. This is due to U.S. and European frustration with Iran and doubts about Iran's seriousness in concluding a deal. It also appears that the Biden administration is not interested in holding a vote on the deal just before the elections. So, we wait. At the IAEA Board of Governors meeting this week, agency head Rafael Grossi discussed some of the challenges ahead with reviving the deal, if we get that far. He said if Iran resumes its nuclear-related commitments, the agency will need to address a gap in its knowledge of what happened while its surveillance and monitoring equipment was not working. And the agency would need to apply additional safeguards, and Iran would need to provide comprehensive and accurate records going back. And Iran's reluctance to provide past information is one of the issues holding up the deal. There is some good news in Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces have had some success in pushing back Russian forces in the north, surprisingly. It is not yet clear if this may be a turning point in the war, or if Russia will retaliate with counterattacks. So we shall see, but so far so good. And at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, Ukraine was finally able to shut down the last operating reactor over the weekend. This power plant is controlled by Russia, has been since the beginning of the war, and is currently, thankfully, monitored by the United Nations. The plant's operator said Sunday morning that power lines had been restored, and that allowed Reactor 6 to be powered down so it could be cooled and hopefully transferred to a safer state. Due to shelling in the area, the entire plant had been disconnected from the electricity grid for several days, with one working reactor supplying power to the rest of the cooling systems, which is not a sustainable situation. Shifting to North Korea, last week leader Kim Jong-un declared his country would never renounce its nuclear weapons, as the regime's leadership formalized its right to launch preemptive nuclear strikes in law. North Korea's parliament passed a law authorizing the military to use nuclear weapons, quote, automatically and immediately in case of an imminent attack against its leadership, unquote. And we will have more on this story later in the episode. Lauren, tell us what you have lined up for early warning.
This week, Alex Hall spoke with Colleen Moore, the advocacy director at Women Cross DMZ. They discussed the recent developments on the Korean peninsula, including the resumption of U.S. South Korean drills, the response from North Korea, and the renewed passport ban. North Korea announced its new law, which you just briefly explained, Tom, shortly after this interview was taped.
And then I speak with Cynthia Lazaroff and Ray Acheson. They are part of a team promoting a virtual reality experience called On the Morning You Wake, which takes the viewer back to 2018 when people in Hawaii got a cell phone alert that ballistic missiles were headed their way. It was a false alarm, thankfully, but people thought they were under nuclear attack for a long 38 minutes. Please stay tuned.
And if you like what you hear, remember to hit subscribe and leave us a rating. Your feedback helps us to improve the show. And with that, let's get into today's episode. The clock is ticking.
And now, early warning, early warning, early warning, early warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Tensions are rising on the Korean peninsula. Senior officials from Japan, the United States, and South Korea have recently met to discuss the growing threat from North Korea. U.S. intelligence reports also indicate that North Korea is selling artillery shells and rockets to Russia. So what does this all mean for the region? To help us understand, I am joined today by Colleen Moore, the advocacy director at Women Cross DMZ. Welcome, Colleen.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Last month, the United States and South Korea conducted their largest joint military drill in years. What is the history here and what prompted this decision?
So the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises are the largest joint military exercises that have been held between the US and South Korea in the past 5 years. So Moon Jae-in, the previous South Korean president, and Donald Trump had suspended or scaled back these war drills back in 2018 in order to advance diplomacy with Pyongyang. But after the current South Korean president, Yoon Suk-yeol, took office in May of this year, Seoul and Washington agreed to normalize and even expand the drills. So really, since the 1950s, the size and scale of these exercises have grown steadily. They've developed into much larger scale exercises that have been based on operation plans that reportedly include preemptive strikes, decapitation measures against the North Korean leadership, involved the use of B-2 and B-52H bombers, which are designed to drop nuclear bombs. So recently, the Colonel Brandon Anderson, who is the division's deputy commander for maneuver, he said that the Ulchi Freedom Shield drills were not aimed at any one adversary, but he did say they took into account the reason for the US ROK alliance meeting North Korea. So it is pretty obvious why they started to resume these war drills, really to deter North Korea, as well as alluding to China and Russia as well, with the geopolitical tensions between US, China, and Russia right now. So the US and South Korea always claim that the drills are defensive in nature and that they're primarily aimed at improving South Korea's preparedness. But North Korea really sees the drills as a rehearsal of invasion and has repeatedly called for a reduction or cessation of the drills. So from Women Cross DMZ's perspective, limiting or halting these exercises would help to reduce tensions on the Korean peninsula. Research has shown that the joint military exercises do not, in fact, deter North Korea, but they only provoke this cycle of tit-for-tat provocations. And we've seen that efforts toward reconciliation and cooperation at the both governmental and the civilian levels between the two Koreas and with the US have failed to build trust because of this cycle of military provocations. Like I mentioned, they were suspended in 2018 because of the historic summits between the US, South Korea, and North Korea, which led to a range of tension-reducing measures. So the DPRK self-imposed a moratorium on nuclear and long-range missile testing. North Korean and South Korean soldiers demined portions of the DMZ. There were release of 3 detained Americans and repatriation of service members' remains, among so many other things. So unfortunately, after no deal was reached at the Hanoi summit, the US and ROK then resumed these combined military exercises in 2019. And then, as we've seen earlier this year, North Korea has since resumed missile tests, ended its self-imposed moratorium on ICBM tests. So really, we see that without establishing new relations and forging a new path, ramping up these military exercises will perhaps have disastrous consequences, of especially seeing that the ramping up of the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises that we saw in the past few weeks.
So another area of tension recently is that the Biden administration has extended the Trump administration's ban on traveling to North Korea with a U.S. passport for 1 year. What do you think the implications are here?
Yes, so in August, the State Department renewed the 2017 travel ban to North Korea, which was a Trump era policy. It's really a travesty for humanitarian activities, family reunions, repatriating service member remains, and peace and reconciliation initiatives like what Women Cross DMZ does. The people to people engagement is so important, especially as tensions rise on the Korean Peninsula. For listeners who may not know, Women Cross DMZ got our start in 2015 when we organized a crossing of the DMZ by 30 prominent international women peace activists. And because of the travel ban on top of the COVID border closures, this cross-cultural diplomacy is not possible right now. And for many years, thousands of Americans have traveled safely without incident to North Korea to reunite with their loved ones. Many have family in North Korea, engage in those educational or cultural activities, like I mentioned. And many humanitarian organizations have been traveling there for years to deliver aid. Many are seeking to reunite with their family members. Many have been separated since the Korean War. All of these people-to-people exchanges, these humanitarian activities, they are so crucial to advancing our national interests and building trust with North Korea. But it's largely been halted, unfortunately, because of the 2017 travel ban. So we really see that the ban is not only unnecessary, but very harmful. And so while North Korea's borders are still closed, I don't think the US sees it as a priority to lift the travel ban, but from our perspective, the US really has nothing to lose by lifting the travel ban. It would really serve as a show of good faith and a confidence building measure to get back to the table. And furthermore, the Biden administration, when they released their North Korea policy review last year, they promised to honor the Singapore agreement and establish new relations. That is the agreement made by President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, where they promised to establish new relations. So, for proponents of diplomacy in the administration, they should be open to restarting this people-to-people exchange programs and show the positive sides of the US to the people of North Korea. And President Biden also promised to prioritize the reuniting divided families, especially there's so many aging Korean Americans that have family in North Korea where time is really running out for them. And so this messaging should resonate with those in the administration that have promised to prioritize this.
So in talking about returning to the table, Yoon Suk-yeol, the new South Korean president, has said he is taking an audacious initiative to denuclearize North Korea. But in response, Pyongyang said it would not engage in dialogue with the new South Korean administration. In what ways is this affecting future dialogue between North and South Korea?
Yes, so the newly elected president, Yoon Suk-yeol, he did recently announce an initiative that lays out the foundation of his administration's approach to North Korea. It really focuses on providing economic incentives and security guarantees for North Korea, kind of in stages corresponding to North Korea's what kind of measures that they're taking for denuclearization. But North Korea really does see this proposal as a non-starter for negotiations. Because insisting on denuclearization upfront has been a failed strategy from both the US and South Korea for decades. But I will say that there could be some kind of opening. There's part of Yoon's proposal that includes providing diplomatic support to normalize US-North Korea relations. And so from Women Cross DMZ's perspective, the priority of the US and South Korea should be to lower barriers to normalize relations, including formally ending the Korean War. As many may not know, there is actually no negotiated settlement keeping war off the table on the Korean Peninsula. So the active hostilities of the Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice agreement. But technically, the US remains in a state of war with North Korea because it was never replaced with a peace agreement. So without this peace agreement, renewed conflict could break out at any time. So it's really about a package of policies that from the US that signal a transformative approach. So I do see maybe there could be an opening with this part of Yoon's proposal, because what the US and South Korea, like I said, have tried for decades has not worked. We are not addressing the root cause of the security crisis on the Korean Peninsula. the arbitrary division of Korea, the unending Korean War that continues to justify extreme militarization on all sides, is really the root cause of the security tensions that we're seeing. And there's a number of confidence building measures that the US could put on the table, like sanctions relief, especially sectoral sanctions relief that are really targeting, especially women dominated industries in North Korea, that sanctions are really hurting, scaling down military exercises, as we've talked about, amending or lifting the travel ban. Even, something that we see as very non-controversial, should be seen as non-controversial, of talking with North Korea about recovery of US service members remains. But unfortunately, the US administration has not showed that they have a plan for any of this, which is really unfortunate. They continue to say that they are open to talks with North Korea with no preconditions, but at the same time continuing these sanctions, scaling up the military exercises, and really continuing the same failed playbook that we've seen for decades. So unfortunately, we do see Yoon's proposal as something that is a non-starter for negotiations generally of the denuclearization upfront, which is really unfortunate, but not surprising. I think we did see that Yoon really campaigned on a hawkish approach toward North Korea, and China is a big part of that as well. But I do think there could be some openings, and we really see that the US needs to take the lead as well, because I think that them saying that, they're willing to provide diplomatic support for normalizing relations is very important, and the US should take them up on that.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and best of luck in all your work.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Shing, the Communications and Marketing Specialist at Plowshares Fund. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has exposed just how close nuclear escalation and nuclear war can be. To meet the urgency of this moment, Plowshares Fund has launched a donation match challenge to make the largest grants possible to those who are working every day to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons. Right now, all first-time gifts will be matched dollar for dollar, and all new monthly gifts will be matched at their 12-month value. Or increase your giving and the full amount above your last gift will be matched. Go to plowshares.org/donate today. And thanks for listening.
Back in 2018, as tensions rose between former President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Hawaii residents received an emergency alert on their cell phones that ballistic missiles were heading their way. People in Hawaii were told to seek immediate shelter and that this was not a drill. Of course, as we now know, it was a false alarm, but for 38 long minutes, people thought they were under nuclear attack. On the Morning You Wake is a virtual reality experience that transports you to Hawaii during the missile alert, when over 1 million people faced impossible choices. Today we are joined by Cynthia Lazaroff and Ray Acheson, leaders in the nuclear disarmament movement, who worked with Games for Change on this project. Cynthia is the founder and director of Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy and a resident of Hawaii whose personal experience is featured in On the Morning You Wake. And Ray is the director of disarmament at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and a steering group member of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, as well as a visiting researcher at Princeton's program on science and global security. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.
So, Cynthia, let's start with you. Your experience that day back in 2018 is included in this virtual reality production. And with this project, you are sharing those 38 horrifying minutes with all of us. Can you tell us why you got involved in this project and what the lessons are for you?
Well, Tom, thank you. I have to say that when On the Morning You Wake came along and I found out about it and had the chance to be a part of it, it really was like an answer to a prayer for me. Because after living through those 38 minutes where it felt like at any moment I could be hit by a nuclear missile, and then hearing that it was a false alarm, my first reaction after learning that was, my God, I'm still here. We're all still here. It was a sense that my life had been returned to me, that this was a wake-up call and that it was also a gift. it was a gift because we had another chance to get this right, to do something about it. And there was this strong call, you need to share this. This needs to be shared with as many people as possible, so that I want everybody to know what this was like, so that we can change our nuclear story, so that we can eliminate nuclear weapons. So On the Morning You Wake gives people a chance to go on that journey with us and experience the moment to moment real time unfolding of what it's like to spend 38 minutes thinking you're about to be hit by a nuclear missile. It gives people the chance to face the impossible questions, choices, decisions that we had to make in those 38 minutes. Things like, first and foremost, where are your loved ones? Can you get to them? Where do you go? What do you take with you? How many minutes do you have? Who do you call to say goodbye? And for me, it was my daughter in Los Angeles. And this is the moment where it all became the most real for me, when she picked up the phone and I said, Mackenzie, I don't know if you've heard, but we've all gotten this message on our cell phones that we're going to be hit by a nuclear missile. And I just want you to know I love you. And she said, I love you too, Mom. That moment is in the film. And so On the Morning You Wake gives people this opportunity to connect with that moment and many other moments like them. I don't want to give the stories away, but there are so many moments in there that are human moments with people of different ages, children, parents, nuclear policy people, all kinds of different people who are going through this all together and having experiences with their loved ones. And most everyone, no matter what your background, your life experience, where you come from, most everyone can connect with this deeply personal human experience. And imagine what it must be like to say goodbye and I love you to your loved one for what you think might be the last time. So On the Morning You Wake, it's a very powerful way, and it's 360 immersive VR. You're right there. You're in our shoes. You're going through this with us. It's a very powerful way of making the nuclear threat personal, tangible, real, of moving out of this abstract nuclear world that is too scary and reserved for the experts and policymakers and has nothing to do with me, and there's nothing I can do about it. This world of powerlessness that we go into, this thinking in our heads that we can't do anything, and it brings it right home, like it did for us here when we got that text message I got it in my living room. It brings it right home into our hearts and to the gravity of what's at stake.
Thank you so much for that. Even hearing you just give us a little bit of it right now is chilling. So I can only imagine how effective and powerful being part of it in a virtual reality experience will be. I can't wait to see the actual thing. Now, Ray, you were not in Hawaii on that day, I take it. But tell us how you think creative storytelling like this can be used to change how people think about the issues. And what do you hope viewers take away from the project?
Well, I think that what Cynthia just described is key. It really explains and unpacks the effectiveness of the storytelling. This film makes it very personal, like Cynthia said, and I think it helps to connect with ordinary people. These are just people going about their lives, trying to live their daily lives, waking up in the morning and not expecting anything like this to be happening. And I think we can all identify with that, no matter where we live or who we are. And I think the other really exciting thing about this project is that it contextualizes this incident in a much broader picture. It reminds us that the nuclear threat is there all the time, that these incidents happen and suddenly everyone remembers that nuclear weapons exist. But what's exciting about the capacity of storytelling is to help people to understand why this happened in a much broader context. So where are the nuclear weapons? Who has the nuclear weapons? Why do nuclear weapons even exist? And thinking about the structure and the politics and the economics that are behind this specific incident that happened in Hawaii. And I think one of the very creative and most compelling aspects of the film is that throughout is woven a poem by Jamaica Osorio, who is an Indigenous Hawaiian poet and an activist and academic. And this poem really seeks to contextualize not just the incident in Hawaii, but the possession of nuclear weapons in a much broader story of colonialism and militarism. So it helps people to understand the violence that these weapons have already done and continue to do every day in our lives, even if they aren't detonated. And I think that's a piece of the nuclear weapons story that most people don't ever really get to reflect upon. You know, it seems like Cynthia was saying is such an abstract issue that's dealt with by policymakers in quarters of power, but really these weapons impact so many people's daily lives throughout history and still now. So it really resonates, I think, to help folks understand the urgency of addressing the nuclear threat, not just because of this incident in Hawaii, or not just because of what you might hear in the news at any given time, but because of the continued persistence of these weapons in our lives.
So let's talk about the larger context for a moment, because you can be congratulated for your timing, because this is coming out just as the public is becoming more aware of nuclear risks, of course, as a result of Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. And this is bringing a new level of urgency to nuclear disarmament discussions. So how are you planning at this key time to use this VR experience to raise awareness of nuclear risk?
So we've been trying to really contextualize the film in this moment to both raise awareness of the risk of nuclear weapons, but also to inspire action. So when we're talking about Russia's nuclear threats and the risks of nuclear war in the context of the war in Ukraine, we're also trying to show the broader challenges about nuclear weapons. So about nuclear deterrence policy as a whole, and the violence that's inherent in a policy that relies on the possible use of a weapon of mass destruction for alleged quote unquote security. We're trying to draw people's attention to the humanitarian and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons that are really based on the experiences of survivors of the use and testing of nuclear weapons and the development of nuclear weapons that's still ongoing. We're trying to draw people's attention to the billions of dollars that are invested every year in nuclear weapons, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're trying to help people see that Russia's nuclear threats in this moment are unique and dangerous, but that there's also, nuclear weapon modernization going on in all of the nuclear armed states, that missiles and bombers and warheads are being upgraded and their lives are being extended into the indefinite future by the 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons. This is, again, not just about a specific incident or a specific country, but about the existence of nuclear weapons overall. And in doing this and trying to raise awareness through this film about this broader context, we don't want people to feel helpless. We want them to be inspired to act. So we ask people that screen the film to consider how they can learn from this story, but also how they can help change the story for now and for future generations.
And if I could ask, are there specific things you're asking people to do?
Yes, we actually give people concrete opportunities to take action to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And they can get involved in the city's campaign, the parliamentary campaign, the country campaign. It's a way to really build the movement and inspire action, as Ray said, in this moment. And it's awakening to action, because it is an awakening in the film, but it's really carefully connected in our campaign to inspiring and empowering people to take action and connecting them with other people doing the work. So, and it also has a very powerful message that we all have agency. We can all make a difference. We all have a stake in this. With this personal stake, it draws those connections both organically and also concretely in the screenings that we do and in the opportunities that we give people to take action to make a difference.
We talk about this as, screenings and a film, but of course it's a VR experience. So you have to wear a headset. So it's a kind of like a one at a time thing. Tell me, how do you share that in a mass way? And what have you done so far to spread the message among as many people as you can?
When we screen the VR experience, as it's called, at a film festival, for example, or at a school, Games for Change will bring a lot of headsets, and so multiple people can have the experience at once. But it is a very individual experience because you are alone in your headset. It's not like watching a movie together on a screen. So it is different in that way. But how we try to engage folks is going into the experience. We have a short survey for people to fill out to sort of gauge what their knowledge of the nuclear weapon issue is already. And then there's a more extensive aftercare survey once they've screened the experience, whether it's one chapter or all three chapters. It's sort of broken up into 15-minute chapters, 3 of them. Then they can fill out this a survey at the end that sort of tries to engage people on how they're feeling after seeing the film, and then what they're inspired to do. So we design these surveys for different cities that the film is being screened in, and we then connect folks directly to local organizations or national organizations or international campaigns that are doing work to change nuclear weapon policy. So it might be a divestment campaign, or getting your city to join the ICANN Cities Appeal, or engaging your parliamentarian, or learning more about international law and nuclear weapons or environmental effects in nuclear weapons. So there's all kinds of different options depending on what people are already interested in, and then what they're inspired to do when they come out of the experience. And we've also developed some educational curriculum for high school and university students, so that once we start doing more work with getting the VR experience into schools, then teachers and professors can have resources to engage students in further discussions. So we did a little bit of this already at the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo earlier this year, where school groups actually came into the museum and went through the experience, and then had a bit of an educational program with their teacher after the film. And we're planning to work with New York City high schools over the coming year and hopefully develop classes that are built around the VR experience.
Great. And what has the response been so far, people who have seen it?
I know Ray has probably spoken to other people, but I would say that we also had screenings going on through the whole Nuclear Ban Week in Vienna, through all the different conferences that were going on there. The ICANN conference, and then the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons conference, and then the first meeting of the states parties, that historic meeting. People had opportunities throughout those events to really experience this and to talk about it. And so one of the most memorable conversations I had was with an investment manager who's doing work on divestment. And he came to me saying that he had been sobbing the whole time, and he was still, teary-eyed, and said, I really want to take this experience to my fund managers, the people who manage weapons. And I want them to, in the context of having a conversation about divestment, to begin by connecting them personally with this issue. And this man is a father, he has children, he was very, very moved as a parent. And he was already interested in the issue, but he was taken it to a whole deeper level with the experience. So, and I think that even the activists that I spoke to, former ambassador who did the experience, everybody was very moved by it and felt that it brought the issue into the realm that Ray has talked about. And I've talked about this personal realm of personally connecting to the issue so that you're awakened and compelled to act.
Now, you've screened this both, as you mentioned, at the meeting of the states parties of the TPNW, the Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons. You also took it to the recent review conference of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. 2 very different venues, different vibes. I'm wondering, was there a different response at those 2 conferences, or was it pretty similar?
From my limited engagement in getting feedback since the review conference, I would say it was pretty similar response, to be honest. In both locations, there was this constant stream of people coming to see the experience. And we had, I don't remember how many, maybe like 6 or 8 headsets at each location. So that's how many people can do it at a time. But there was no shortage of people waiting to see it. So, and there was even a sign up that you could do to make sure you got a spot to see it. So I think it's been remarkable how many people want to engage the film, whether they're already completely on board with nuclear abolition, or if they're just curious about what the message is, or curious about having a VR experience for some folks. I think it's a really good reminder to diplomats and policymakers of the human element of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it can help challenge some of the assumptions about nuclear safety and security. So I think it's an experience that works on lots of different levels depending on who the audience is. And I think because of that human element that Cynthia eloquently described, that can really connect to everybody, no matter who you are or what your position on nuclear weapons is. It's hard to refute the emotion that comes through in this film.
So last question for you both. It's been 4 years now since the Hawai'i false alarm. Has anything changed to make you feel more reassured about the nuclear dangers we face? And if not, what do you think needs to change and what is next with this project?
Unfortunately, Tom, I wish I could say otherwise, but nothing has changed to make me feel better about the possibility of false alarms. And in fact, with the daily risk of escalation over the war in Ukraine, I'm more concerned about the possibility of some kind of accidental miscalculation or mistake that could lead to the unthinkable happening. And so I think that the biggest lesson is that until we eliminate nuclear weapons, we're always going to be at risk of a nuclear false alarm. We've had so many false alarms in the past with nuclear weapons in history when we came so close to nuclear war by accident or mistake. And, machines malfunction, machines break down, people make mistakes. And with the Hawai'i false alarm, we were reminded once again that you can never eliminate the possibility of human error. So the big lesson is that we can never eliminate the nuclear risk 100% until we eliminate nuclear weapons. And I have no illusions about the formidable obstacles in the way of achieving this. But at this time, at this moment, the moral and existential imperative to eliminate nuclear weapons has really never been greater. And that's, it comes back to the lesson of on the morning you wake, that we're still here and we still have time to get this right. And what I think about, what keeps me going in these moments where it seems sometimes really impossible, are the words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And, we've seen things change very quickly in history, unexpectedly. People said, although some things took a long time, people said apartheid would never end. People said the Berlin Wall would never come down, that the Cold War would never end. And we've lived to see the world change. And so that's again, comes back to the big message that we hope people, will take away from this, which is that on the morning you wake, which is that we all have agency. We can all make a difference. And in this moment, we can act now to change the nuclear story and to abolish nuclear weapons by taking action to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
And Ray, if you're someone that wants to see this VR experience, how would one do so?
So there will be future museum and film festival engagements coming up. There's going to be, for folks in Melbourne, Australia, for example, in October, Games for Change Asia Pacific Festival will feature On the Morning You Wake. So that's an opportunity to see it. And you can check out the On the Morning You Wake website to find out where it's going to be next. But you can also write to Games for Change and you can ask for opportunities, or if you have a local film festival or an event coming up where you would like to offer the experience to people to view, then you can get directly in touch. They're very responsive to that. You can also just, if you already have a headset, an Oculus 2 headset, you can download the entire VR experience for free on the Oculus app. So you just have to search for On the Morning You Wake and it's there and it's free. So if you and your friends want to see it, that is also possible.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you both so much for your time, and I wish you all the best in all of your work with this exciting VR experience. I wish you all the best.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced and edited in Washington, D.C. by Lauren Billett, Angela Kellett, and Alex Hall. Audio engineering in San Francisco by Jacqueline Shing. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.